domain with thick bonds. And only when there are thick bonds across, sociality can be realized, and human beings can achieve their fullest perfection. Because that bond allows you to tap resources, to be connected, and to be recognized. I cannot ask the entire world to for justice. I can demand justice from my nation because that is the bounded territory to which I belong. And therefore, if you remember his book on Pakistan or partition of India, thick bonds require belonging and strong belonging. And he thought that if nations are going to fight within the boundary of a state all the time, then that kind of a bond becomes extremely difficult to be realized unless people make a resolution that we are going to live together. And therefore, there is a tentativeness in that book. There are different interpretations about that. I've read that book several times. There's a tentativeness in that book, and that tentativeness has to be appreciated. Ambedkar uses democracy as a means by which justice can be realized. Because if there is initial equality, if there are talents, if social goods have to be distributed, he thinks that democracy becomes the most important agency through which some of these decisions have to be made. But he has two concepts of justice. One is a notion of radical justice. He has two concepts of democracy. One is a concept of radical democracy. Another one is a concept of constitutional democracy. Both of them intertwined, both of them interconnected. The idea of radical democracy suggests a political association of free and equal citizens who are associated in the distant future and decide their common affairs. But he argues that it is very difficult to realize that radical democracy. He calls it Swaraj. And the meaning of this Swaraj is significantly different from the way Gandhi uses, for instance, the concept of Swaraj. Ambedkar thinks that that ideal is extremely difficult to realize, and therefore you need to have a mechanism through which that ideal can be realized. And he proposes the idea of constitutional democracy. So, constitutional democracy is the means through which we drive ourselves as a collective towards radical democracy. Therefore, constitutional democracy for Ambedkar needs to be tilted towards radical democracy rather than becoming an end in itself. It is through representation, my next chapter, it is through representation that we realize constitutional democracy. So he defines representation. He argues that representation is a mode of deciding collective life, associated life. And therefore, everyone needs to have a right to represent. And he was the first one to argue for universal franchise in India. But he says that if the society is deeply divided into communities and sectarian divides, then common representation would be very difficult because the majority would run away with representative will. So, under such conditions, the best option would be what he calls separate representation. But he thinks that a society which is united in terms of thick bonds, there should be universal representation with reservation to minorities. And all of you know Ambedkar's role, and often Ambedkar is confined there, of devising a constitution where some of these principles can be realized. And he plays a key role there. And we had not come to appreciate that role for a very long time. But if you had seen the last parliament session in India, you would know how Ambedkar today becomes the object of envy across political parties, because everyone wants to own him today, because they want to define the constitution in their own ways. And Ambedkar becomes the key symbol of constitutional reasoning in India. And my ninth chapter of my book discusses this. And the last chapter, I go into the kind of relationship between religion and politics that Ambedkar argues. Ambedkar argues that constitutional democracy, representative order, idea of justice, democracy, requires a base. And that base lies in a moral domain. And it is important to cultivate that moral domain. And